So the Olympics, whether or not President Bush should go to China, some conservatives, Redstate among them, are starting a petition calling on the president not to go to China. This issue really divides the conservative base. There are some who say he should go, and a lot of us say he shouldn't go. Jane, how is the more progressive base on that issue?
Well, I think that we've got the same split on the liberal side that you have in the conservatives. I think Obama is saying that he shouldn't go, that he should go. And Hillary Clinton originally said that he shouldn't go, but now is sort of being, more ambiguous about it. And I've talked with people on the left who feel both ways. I personally think that it's great that you're doing the petition and that you're concerned with, the human rights factor in the situation. But I'm just curious, is there an ask before don't go? I mean, Bush has got a lot of leverage in this situation. What would make you happy on the part of the Chinese before we get to don't go? Is there anything?
Probably if they would loosen up some of their freedoms, I would reconsider it. But, I mean, really, no. This is a guy who he's wanted us to believe for 8 years he's a freedom fighter liberating the Middle East. And here we've got China oppressing the Tibetans, the Christians, the Falun Gong, anybody who speaks out against them. And he's going to go give them credibility that I don't think they really deserve by going to the Summer Olympics.
Well, there are two things. Number one, I think that Students for a Free Tibet are actually asking that when the torch passes through Tibet, that the Chinese agree to not arrest demonstrators, because the Chinese have made it clear that if any demonstrations happen, they'll be dealt with severely, which means,
right,
killing them, throwing them in jail, all of the things that can happen. Would the agreement, not to do that, would that make you happy? Because I think Gavin Newsom actually got quite a few concessions out of the Chinese when the torch passed through San Francisco. And if Gavin Newsom can do them, it seems like George Bush might have some leverage as well.
Yeah, if he could take some leverage like that, I think that would go a long way towards helping it. Generally, I kind of like to think the president can exercise his best judgment, but as this present situation stands, unless things do change and change dramatically, I would say no, don't go.
Well, I'm also curious, too, because last week the president admitted that he and Dick Cheney had sat around and elaborately choreographed the torture methods that were used in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I'm just curious, in the eyes of the world, do we really have the moral standing to do something like this right now?
Oh, I think we do. Number one, I don't necessarily know that they're torture methods. I think you and I would probably disagree on that one, but I would say that the difference would be the people we're interrogating in Iraq are actual terrorists and the Tibetans are not.
Well, I don't know that that's necessarily true. In Afghanistan, we killed a cab driver. I mean, the people who are being interrogated we don't know this about them. In Afghanistan, it was common for the warlords to turn over people for bounties that had done absolutely nothing. So, I'm not sure, I am sure. This is not what the United States stands for. This is not the United States that I grew up in. We are supposed to be better than the people who are trying to bring democracy to, and just because they do it doesn't mean that we should do it. The methods they were using were the same methods that were used on Vietnam prisoners when they were captive in Hanoi. They're the same interrogation methods that were used on John McCain, and that's considered torture. I
actually don't think that waterboarding is torture. I mean, I understand McCain's position on that, but I don't think that it is. I don't think it really puts their life in jeopardy when they're tortured. And I'm not one of those people who say we made no mistakes, unlike a lot of the administration. I think we have made mistakes, and we can always point to those mistakes. But I think by and large we've done a very good job rooting out the terrorists, and I think the interrogation methods have been unfortunately necessary.
Eric, you're a good person. Can you look at those photos of Abu Ghraib and say that this is okay?
See, but I don't think that was something that the United States sanctioned. I think those were a bunch of renegade soldiers almost, the guys who were doing this having fun, the ones we decided to lower the bar to let into the military because we were having trouble recruiting, that we never should have lowered that bar. I don't think that was an American thing. I think those were individual soldiers who shouldn't have acted in that way.
I think that it starts at the top. There have been reports that Dick Cheney and George Bush sat around like a couple of frat boys talking about what they would do with the terrorists if they ever got a hold of them. These are guys who were never in the military, who never served. I think it's really not fair to the soldiers in Iraq to say this is your responsibility when it clearly started at the top.
Well, I think if Cheney and Bush sat around saying what they would do to terrorists, I would probably do worse than what they wanted to do. It's not something that works me up on the Abu Ghraib issue, because I don't think that came from the top. I think it was a group of soldiers who shouldn't have done what they did and got punished appropriately for having done what they did.
I think that this is going on all over the world. We're in a bad moral place to take a position, of high moral standing. We went into Iraq. We didn't have justification for it. We said we had proof that we didn't have. Tens, if not hundreds of thousands of Iraqis have died. And so going in and telling the Chinese what they ought to be doing, I think the international community is going to look on it with a great degree of skepticism.
Well, if the international community wants to look on it with skepticism, I mean, that's fine with me to let them, but I still don't think we need to be sending the president to China if they're not going to improve the situation over there. I mean, this is one of those issues I think you and I can probably go around and around on and probably never really come to some serious agreement on, other than that I am one of those conservatives who will say mistakes were made. And I think Abu Ghraib was a mistake, but I do think it had more to do with the soldiers than the administration and the policy.
Well, I applaud your commitment to human rights. I think that's a good thing, Eric, and I hope that there can be something that Bush can do in this situation that can make things safer in Tibet, potentially.
Well, I think if he wants to do something, I really do think it is not to go. I think if he goes, he's going to be useful propaganda for the Chinese, and if he doesn't go, I think it'll send a much stronger signal if he doesn't go. I'm really concerned about the Chinese portraying this as a win internally, and I know there are a lot of conservatives who are saying, oh, well, if we go, the media will be there, and the media will be able to have a spotlight on this. Not in China. They're not going to. And the media wants access anyway, so they're not going to do something to rock the boat with China. So I would hate to see us be used as propaganda. But in any event, you want to move on to the next topic? Or
let's go. Let's knock them off.
Yeah, let's go to the Obama one. I'm interested to hear your take on this one. He I guess, said the statement the other day in San Francisco about the guns and religion and the rural voters in Pennsylvania. He's gone away from that and said I think I saw a YouTube clip where he said he chose his words wrong, but he meant what he said. Don't want to mischaracterize him here. If you want to throw in on this, and what do you think?
Well, I think that it's really a shame, not to go back to our previous topic, that when you look on Google News, there are 4,000 entries, news articles over the bitter comment, and only 400 on the president admitting that he authorized torture. But that aside, I understand why people heard Obama's comments and got a little sensitive over them. I think that when he said, and I think he's admitted that he chose his words intemperately, but on the whole, I don't really think that what he's getting at is wrong. I think people are very upset, and I think that's statistically, able to be backed up. People are not happy with the direction that the country is going in. I think that they were, that rural voters may have been upset because they felt like their allegiance to the church or to hunting or gun ownership was being diminished by saying that it was because of bitterness over economic factors. But I don't think that he meant that in a pejorative way. Obama was talking about it as a member of a church, as a member of as a person of faith. And I think he was talking about very much what, he saw within his own community as well. So the idea that he was talking down to rural voters as opposed to being a member of a church who was talking to other people of faith, I think is where a mistaken interpretation got made. What do you think, Eric?
Well, I guess what heightens the concern for me is that the Obama campaign sent out the clip from CNN of Jack Cafferty and others kind of defending a statement. And one of the things that Cafferty said, or is it Cafferty or Cafferty, that in the Middle East when this happens that people turn to terrorism and here they're turning to guns and religion, and I guess kind of his initial response in defense was to send out this clip of a guy saying, well, in the Middle East these people become terrorists, here they just become hicks with guns and religion.
Now, Obama didn't say this. Jack Cafferty said
Jack
this.
Cafferty did, but his campaign sent out...
He's not running for president.
Yeah, I know, but it was a little perturbing to me that of all of the people out there who were saying things, kind of justifying his remark or explaining it away, they sent out this clip of Cafferty, and I just think when people say things like that, a lot of times that they are probably a little more real when they say it than otherwise, that the guard is down, so to speak, and when he says things like these rural voters are turning to guns and religion, particularly when I think the Clinton campaign in particular has done a very good job lately of raising concerns about Obama's commitment to gun rights and the whole religion issue with Reverend Wright. I think it probably does hurt him. I would say this, though. I think it was Mickey Kaus who pointed out the other day that Obama has started going back down in the polls in Pennsylvania, and we shouldn't buy into a myth that the media will probably generate now that he started going down because of this remark, because it looks like he started going down several days before he made this remark. And I think you and I both know how it works, that the media will eventually come up with a narrative of what happened, that this is the remark that made Obama lose Pennsylvania. Well, he's probably going to lose Pennsylvania anyway. I think it may actually have more impact in places like North Carolina than it will in Pennsylvania.
Well, I guess my concern is a larger concern. It's, Obama, admitted that he made a misstatement, but what it's being used is proof of the fact that he's an elitist as opposed to regular guy John McCain. And this happens every election. It's sort of the standard way that the right wing starts to try and take apart Democrats. Michael Dukakis, John Kerry, that they're elitists. And Barack Obama was born poor, a single mother. He got what he got, lived the American dream by dint of hard work and really beating the odds. And so the characterization of him as sort of a latte sipping elitist as a result of this, I think is a real mischaracterization, especially when you're talking about John McCain being his counterpoint, who, much like George Bush, grew up in a very privileged background. And that's the kind of media creep I see happening. And I think that's it's wrong.
Yeah, now, let me ask you that. Do you think that's the Republican narrative, or is it just that it's happened for so long that the media kind of goes on and constructs this for everyone? You had Kerry the snob versus Bush the regular Joe, and I mean, I agree with you. I see it happening now that we're turning Obama into the snob versus McCain the war hero, and I don't necessarily know that that's the right wing doing it. It just seems like the media has these pre-formatted templates that they do it every year. The Democrats are always the snobs, and the Republicans are always the ones who are the way out of touch kind of fringe guy.
I think that was really pounded into the media, though, by the right wing, by Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity's endless repetition of Michael Dukakis, who also grew up very working class, being a latte-sipping elite. And I just, there may be some argument being made over some people, but Barack Obama, I just don't find that to be true. He really defied the odds in everything he did, and he comes from a very humble background.
Yeah, he does come from a very interesting background. I will give you that, but I see Barack Obama, and I think this is a guy who he did climb the pillars of success, probably much more so than someone like John Kerry or Michael Dukakis. But now that he's reached up to this level where he is, he kind of looks down on everyone else. And I mean, I realize he wants to preach this mantra of hope and change and climb up the mountain just like I did. But I think his solutions to do that are misguided and off base.
But why do you think he's looking down on people? That's what I don't get. I don't get this condescension.
Oh, I get it from the statements that he and his wife have made. Well, his statement I'll accept it was him misspeaking, but to some degree I think it was kind of an unguarded, off-the-cuff moment about the guns and God, and then his wife having not been proud of the country, and she thinks it's a mean-spirited nation. I don't see us being a mean-spirited nation, and I think it doesn't help him when these remarks come out. It really does skew the image of him. My wife is in a Bible study and has some friends who very much love his biography, love what he says, but even a couple of them who are Democrats and will vote for Obama have this kind of impression creeping in now from his wife's remarks about being a mean-spirited nation, and these remarks about Obama, I'm sure I'll hear tonight when this Bible study class comes over, what their latest take is on this. I think some people have some legitimate concerns based on this.
Well, as the daughter of a Southern minister, I have to ask you, don't you think people go to faith when times are bad?
Yeah, I think people do go to faith when times are bad. I don't think it really came out the way that Obama meant it. And when they follow it up with this Cafferty remark from CNN, I think maybe it's not that Obama's the snob, but maybe he has some people in his campaign who aren't quite attuned to the same people that Obama is.
I think if you've got a campaign staff mailing out a clip, it doesn't necessarily mean that Obama's a snob. I mean, I heard his comments and I went, okay, I could see where people might get sensitive about that, but I think that they came from the heart, and I think they were valid. I think they were true. I think people, when times get hard, do fly to the things that they're passionate about, and I don't think that comes from a sense of cultural condescension. I think that comes from him being truly a person of faith.
Well, let me ask you, shifting topics on this just slightly, and I want to get into this on McCain as well. Would you look at the primary shaping up so far? How divisive has this been among people on the left as far as choosing Hillary, Obama, or Edwards?
I want to stick my fingers in my ears and sing la 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 la, I can't hear you when the topic comes up anymore. I'm so tired of it, I can't stand it. But that's just me personally. I take it back. It's a lot of people. But I think it's kind of been great for the party. I think that people in Pennsylvania never had the situation where their vote in the primary counted before. So all of a sudden, they're in the middle of it, and they've got, the candidates coming there and talking about the issues and money's being poured in to get out the vote. And I think it's kind of great for them. Just me is tired of talking about it, but I don't know that me and you are... Just because we want to move on.
That's true.
I take it back. You're probably having a great time at this.
Well, I am now, but and I guess this is a great transition to shift into McCain. The Republican primary was nuts. I mean, you had a situation set up where a lot of us said this was, if someone on the right mentions race, there's sometimes an immediate response from some folks on the left that this guy shouldn't be talking about race, and it became that with this religion issue in Mitt Romney, that if you dared to say something bad about Mitt Romney, you must be an anti-Mormon bigot, how dare you hate Mitt Romney, you must hate the whole religion, and it's kind of nice now to sit back and breathe a sigh of relief that we now have our nominee to see the Democrats going through this. I'm surprised that the Republicans are at all able to coalesce around John McCain after our primary.
And I think that they haven't yet. I mean, what do you feel about James Dobson's recent comments that he I think he was saying he wouldn't vote for McCain, and now he's saying he's going to withhold judgment, and he's trying to get McCain to change his position on stem cell research. What do you think?
There's some backpedaling going on. I think at the end of the day, Republicans are probably, I would say, superficially helped by having Hillary Clinton as a nominee, as someone to rally around, because there's so much about Obama I don't think people know really on either side. But this McCain thing is he's having a hard time, and the problem is I think it really gets into his temper. You've got a lot of folks in the past, from John Cornyn to whoever, who have had these encounters with McCain around the table where he says something he probably shouldn't have said, yells at him, is very angry. Still remember in 2000 the famous clip of him with Maria Shriver asking him the question, and he snapped at her on the way out to the floor. The guy does have a temper.
Yes, he does have a temper, but do you really think that that's why conservatives won't rally around him, as opposed to his position on stem cell research, or his history of being pro-choice that has now changed, or he sends Arnold Schwarzenegger to the Log Cabin Republican Convention in San Diego? I mean, he just doesn't have the bona fides as a social conservative. That
he's got these issues, but I think by and large the temper actually is a bigger issue, because
really,
I mean, folks really, I mean, on the right, on the left, it really doesn't matter. The people, I think, they want to win. The problem is, do you really want to win with a guy who's jerked you around before? And a lot of conservatives are going to have to get over that. I mean, they recognize this guy's going to be the nominee. They're going to hope and pray he actually chooses an acceptable conservative running mate as his vice presidential running mate. But, I mean, there are a lot of people who have been burned by his temper in the past. And I think by and large, while there are people who have major issues with him on immigration and stem cells and other issues, they remember the temper, and this is a guy who, when he's on your side but he's not with you on an issue, he treats you worse than the guys on the other side who aren't with him on the issue.
Well, here's a quandary for McCain, and I would ask you what you would do if you were advising his campaign, because the thing that polls worst for McCain is his predilection for switching his position in order to please social conservatives. Yet there are social conservatives who won't line up for him unless he changes his positions. So what would you advise him to do? Is there somebody perhaps he could choose as a vice presidential running mate that would make you happy?
Yeah, I think it really is going to come down to his running mate for him because I think he is. I mean, take immigration, for example. If McCain were to switch his position from where it has been on immigration, I think it'd be wholly disingenuous of him. If, however, he were able to pick a running mate who doesn't take the same position as him on some of these issues, he is more conservative, I think conservatives would be more willing to embrace him on that pick by, I guess, showing that they're not going to be shut out, which is a fear of a lot of conservatives, that they would be shut out of a McCain administration. I think that's probably unfounded, but understand where they're coming from. So if he were to pick a Bobby Jindal or a Mark Sanford or a Tim Pawlenty or even a Sarah Palin or a Portman that people are talking about right now, I think conservatives would probably breathe a sigh of relief. If he went the other route and chose a Charlie Crist or someone like that, I think conservatives probably would wind up sitting on their hands and not doing anything.
McCain Tancredo 08?
I think I'd rather that than McCain Paul 08.
I think your chances are pretty good of not getting either.
Yeah, I think so. And that kind of reminds me off the beaten path. Whatever happened to the John Edwardses and the Duncan Hunters of this field? I mean, do you think we may see people like that come back?
My guess is that John Edwards could be, if this goes to the convention, and my hope is seriously that it won't, that John Edwards could resurface as like a unifying force. I don't see him as being the vice president on the ticket. I don't think he helps either candidate, particularly in terms of what they're going to need in the general. But I think that, people have a lot of respect for him, and both candidates have a lot of respect for him. So he could kind of step in and be the guiding wisdom that reunites everybody. But I don't see him at anything other than that.
I have the same thought on Romney. I don't see Romney being McCain's vice president. And frankly, you mentioned one of McCain's weaknesses is his flipping to the conservative side. You want to talk about flip-flopper. I don't know what it is in the water in Massachusetts, but I don't really think that Mitt Romney would be a good fit for vice president because of those issues. I mean, the guy's taken every side of every position out there in the past 10 years. Well,
you like someone like Bobby Jindal. Do you think he needs somebody from the South?
I don't necessarily think he does. I think this may be the first year in a long time where the South is not a big factor. I think the South will probably go Republican, whichever way, whoever the nominee is. But I would expect that they need to find someone from like the Midwest, from an Ohio or somewhere like that, or actually out west where the Republicans have been getting clobbered as they've moved more and more away from the leave me the heck alone style conservatism to the in-your-face conservatism.
Very interesting. This could be a first. That conventional wisdom. You need someone from the South on the ticket to win.
Yeah, I don't see it happening this year. I think the Republicans really need somebody from out west or Midwest to win this year. I mean, I think they're going to keep the South.
Who's your perfect? Who's your choice, Eric?
I'm leaning towards Rob Portman. I think he may actually be a good guy, an unknown. Someone referred to him the other day as a competent Dan Quayle. Maybe so. And I think maybe on the Democratic side, an Evan Bayh or someone like that would be good too. All those Ohio, Indiana areas where the Republicans and Democrats are neck and neck.
I think it depends on who the nominee is and what their what their strengths are, what they're going to need to sort of compensate for them at the time. And I assume it's going to be Barack Obama. I really don't see how Hillary Clinton does it at this point, right. But we'll see.
Well, I just pray to God on our side it's not Condoleezza Rice.
After having the revelation last week that she was in the conversations with Dick Cheney and George Bush about torture methods, I'm going to agree with you.
Well, this is a woman who she can't even really overcome the State Department bureaucracy to get anything done. So I'm a big fan of hers, but I'm really disappointed with her as Secretary of State. So anyway, how about we talk about those free trade pacts?
What are you going to say? Are you going to tell me, Eric, you think that it's a great thing that the House did this, right?
Yes. I am a big proponent of free trade and don't really like the talk of fair trade. I think free trade goes on in the world and we probably ought to embrace it. And particularly in South America, I think actually the Bush administration has dropped the ball by and large on South America. And I think these free trade pacts could probably help us in an area where we desperately need it. I mean, I think it was Donald Rumsfeld. For all that people may think of Rumsfeld, I think he made a very sound point a couple of years ago that we have so dropped the ball in South America. We see China having better military relations with countries in South America than the U.S. right now.
Well, explain to me, because George Bush last week said that if Colombia free trade doesn't pass, that the terrorists win, basically, because Hugo Chavez, who doesn't seem to execute people, he seems to, his grand sin of terrorism seems to be nationalizing companies. Can you kind of explain to me how that fits into the terrorism narrative? Because I'm kind of missing it.
Well, FARC has been very aggressive in trying to undermine in the Colombian government, and the Colombian people actually support better relations with the United States. One of the things this free trade pact would help is to improve those relations and boost some trade down there and create some jobs in Colombia that are desperately needed, as more and more people are trying to be wooed by the drug money that FARC has and is supposedly being subsidized by Venezuela and Ecuador. I think that the free trade pact would go a long way towards helping solidify some of those relationships and bolster the administration down in Colombia that desperately needs some help right now against these terrorists.
Well, I think that I think that your decision to value human rights in Tibet is really laudable. But the Colombian government has had a really terrible record with regard to labor. There have been 400 labor executions since the president took office. And various fact-finding missions that have gone down have found that very much goes on by the military, by arms of the government that are trying to characterize them as communists. And I think that labor has a very legitimate beef saying that until something is done, we shouldn't be doing this. And I want to know how you sort of harmonize those two things.
Well, by and large, I actually think that the Colombian government is on the money on a lot of these things. That I think you see this insurgent FARC campaign inside labor as a tool to propagate, I guess, what is by and large an aggressive communist agenda by them. I'm not in favor of the executions that the Colombian government has undertaken. I think some of those, though, are questionable as to how exactly the Colombian government is doing it, whether or not it actually is the Colombian government doing it. But definitely think we do need to make inroads. And frankly, I think if we were to be able to boost free trade down there, that we would by and large help the situation. There would be a level of public oversight involved in the issue. The State Department, if we had a free trade agreement, would be much more involved in issues like that. I think it could help alleviate the situation. Well, I do understand, though, the labor concerns down there. There are a lot of labor concerns.
Well, 98% of those crimes go unsolved. So obviously the government doesn't seem to think that it really needs to root it out and get to the bottom of it. And labor membership has gone from a top of 15% down to 5%. So it's had a real effect on suppressing labor organization and labor rights. And the problem is that when that happens, wage suppression happens, and the cost of goods are artificially suppressed. And they wind up at an unfair advantage to American manufacturers and American goods and American workers. And I think that's why American workers overwhelmingly think this is not such a good thing for us right now.
I've got to apologize for those who are looking at me on the camera right now. I'm kind of laughing because as you're going through those statistics, I'm thinking, wow, I didn't know Walmart was in Colombia. All the suppression of labor and everything else. I don't mean to make light of it, but it seems like all the labor suppression down there. Yes, there's labor suppression happening in Colombia. By and large, though, I don't know how much of that is actually government involved and how much of it is business involved. I definitely think the government needs to crack down on it. I don't know why not having a free trade agreement with Colombia would be an impetus for something like that. I think Colombia would probably be more likely to improve the situation if we were able to go along with it. I mean, from my vantage point, we've had now for several years a large anti-labor or anti-free trade movement in Congress that has really looked down on Colombia, and by and large, even on the FARC engagements by Colombia, has been trying to shut out Colombia. And I think Colombia is getting nothing but a signal from Washington that a majority of the members of Congress don't care about the country.
Well, I think that people on the whole look at free trade as something that has been a strong force in taking their jobs away across the country. Would you agree with that?
No, actually, I wouldn't. I mean, we're at the lowest unemployment rate in history. We're below 5% for a good little while. I don't actually think that free trade takes jobs away. Certainly, it takes some jobs away, but then it replaces those with other jobs. I think it's a misnomer to say free trade takes jobs away, particularly in light of the rapid decline in unemployment over the past number of years.
Well, two things. One, my question is actually, do you think people feel this way? Because I think that they do.
Yeah, I think they feel that way. I would disagree with them, but yeah, you're right. They definitely feel that way.
I mean, I think the general perception is, and I think there's some statistical backup for it, that the jobs that have been replaced have been jobs with no benefits, jobs that are minimum wage. They're McJobs that don't allow people to achieve the American dream, and the result has been downward mobility. Whether that's the result of free trade or not is maybe open to debate, but I think the American people really feel that way. So I don't think there's a lot of popular support to go in and open up markets for American big business when the cost is jobs, potentially. You know, that competing with workers who have artificially lower wages that they can't compete with.
See, you know, I think damn lies, and statistics, you and I would disagree on that. I think the majority of jobs that are being created in the country are actually good jobs with benefits. Free trade isn't taking those jobs away. Now, granted that there is a level of jobs in this country that people are working to get out of, but I think if you look at the acceleration of people out of poverty in this country in the past 20 or 30 years, we've actually seen a strong commitment and a strong growth out of poverty into the middle class, and the middle class into the upper middle class, and the upper middle class into the rich class. And I think that during this whole time we've been undergoing this movement of free trade. I don't think it's been bad at all. I would agree with you, though, that a lot of people feel that it's definitely a bad thing. I think it's totally been mischaracterized and, frankly, botched by Republican administrations trying to sell it as well as Democratic administrations.
Well, I also think that there are some problems with the statistics regarding unemployment. I think that the actual number of people who are not working but want to work and aren't counted in the unemployment rolls is much higher. And the level of discontent is really strong. So I don't think the Democrats would have done this had they felt that there wasn't a lot of popular support for it. So I don't think that George Bush has made his case very well that this deal needs to go through or the terrorists win.
I don't think the administration, but I don't really think that the Clinton administration did a very good job selling NAFTA either, or the Reagan administration, or the Bush administration before that. Free trade just seems to me to be very hard to sell. It makes sense to me, but then it's not one of those touchy-feely issues, and I think by and large on issues like this, its feelings get in the way of a lot of the other issues involved, and people do see when the mill in South Carolina or North Carolina gets closed down and those jobs go overseas, it's a very literal, real thing to them. I think those jobs are not necessarily always offset right there. I think other jobs replace them, not necessarily right there, and I mean it hits people in the pocketbook. So the administration has done a terrible job. Again, I think a lot of this has to do with Secretary Rice and an inability to unravel the unwieldy State Department.
So how do you think John McCain would make this any different?
I don't know that McCain would make free trade different. Hopefully he would support going forward with this initiative. Maybe McCain can talk about it in a way better than Bush. I mean, I think there's not a Republican out there who would say that Bush is a very strong communicator. He's not. I think McCain is a better communicator and possibly can talk about this in a better way than the way Bush has talked about it.
Do you think that conservatives are looking forward to getting rid of George Bush?
Speaking as a conservative, I very much like the guy, and I'm very ready for him to be gone. That may surprise some, but I feel like for 8 years, conservatives like me have defended this administration and a lot of their policies when the administration has been unwilling or unable to defend itself. I think Dan Bartlett was a terrible communicator for the president. I don't think the president is a very good communicator. Frankly, if Bush wanted to go on and take a holiday and let Cheney run things from here on out, I think we would all be surprised by how much better off we do by the time January rolls around.
Okay.
Weren't expecting that, were you?
No, I think we're just going to agree to disagree on that one.
I just, and I hate to say it because I really do like the guy. I do like the administration, but I am ready for this administration to be done with. I'm one of those people who thinks that the Democrats historically have better odds of winning this year. History is against the Republicans by all indicators. John McCain may be able to pull it off if the Democrats are continued to be fractured after the primary season is over. But I'm kind of tired of the Bush administration.
Do you think that because John McCain has an image as a moderate, which I don't agree that he is, but that is the public perception, that it actually stands him in better position to win this time as opposed to a true social conservative?
No, I don't think it's that the public views him as a moderate, although I'm sure a lot of the public does. I think the public views McCain as the anti-Bush. He is a Republican, but he has been so publicly against Bush, first running against him in 2000, and then publicly on issues related to the war and taxes and the economy, that people are willing to say, yeah, they're in the same party, but they're polar opposites.
Wait. They have different positions on the war?
Yeah, they have had different positions on the war throughout. Now, McCain is supporting it now, but it was McCain who really stood up to the president and said they needed to make changes long before the president was ready to admit.
He wanted more war, though, Eric. He didn't want... It wasn't like he was sitting there going, don't do this, George. This is a huge mistake.
No, well, I actually think this is one of the great divides between liberals and conservatives and a lot of independents there is... The whole time we were going through this war before the surge, I took the position we actually needed to actually fight as opposed to what we were doing, which was going on patrols with Iraqis and engaging in a lot of hand-holding. And McCain, I think, took that position that we needed to send more troops, we needed to rout out the terrorists, we needed to fight. And you and I can disagree on that, I think, but I think by and large that was an issue that the president had to be sold on. The administration, I realize why the president in 2004 didn't want to say there were any mistakes. It would have just become a campaign issue, but mistakes were made. I'm glad they moved to the surge, but it did take someone like John McCain really standing up and saying we need to do something different.
I don't know. This is the same thing that happened after Vietnam. This narrative soaked in that if only we had let them fight, we would have won. And I just don't think that is a realistic assessment of what happened. It was a botched idea from the beginning, sold on unreliable information by people who didn't know what they were doing. And I don't think that more war would have helped. More troops. That this represents a revisionist, like any kind of opinion that's significantly different than what.
Do you not think that the surge is working?
I don't think things are going so well over there right now. So I don't know what constitutes working.
Well, I think the situation has greatly improved from just a year ago. So I would say that there are signs that the surge is working. I still think one of the fundamental problems, and I think McCain recognized this, is the failure of the Iraqi government to get its stuff in gear. But, that's an issue that we're going to have to deal with. I do think the surge is having a measurable beneficial impact in helping the situation over there, though, to accept and encourage stability.
It's a mess. I think that we're expecting a government, like a country, that we went in and pretty much destroyed the infrastructure to suddenly pull together a government that can deal with all these problems that we certainly can't deal with. I think the expectation that we could go in and level the place and create circumstances that this was possible was a fiction. And I don't think more troops would have made that any better.
Oh, see, now this is one of those places, ladies and gentlemen, where Jane and I disagree. I think it would be an unfair characterization to say we went in and leveled the place. I think by and large that it wasn't a great place to begin with before we actually went in. There wasn't a huge deal of infrastructure. The largely Shiite areas of Baghdad, I think, were slums before we went in. Yes, we did bomb some of the power plants, but yes, we are rebuilding the power plants. Yes, there were water treatment facility problems, but some of those were actually terrorist engaged. They blew up the water plant, not us. So
they weren't blowing them up before we got there.
Yes, they weren't blowing them up before we got there, but by and large, you had large segments of the population who were denied water because they were against the Saddam Hussein regime anyway. Was there infrastructure damage caused by the U.S.? Absolutely. Have we gone a long way towards rebuilding it? Absolutely. I think it was a net positive, and I guess that the fundamental issue, this is where you and I would disagree, I think it was a good war to go in and get rid of Saddam Hussein. I think it was a necessary thing for us to do, and I'm willing to stand by that war.
I don't think that's why we told people we were going in, and I think most of the American people are pretty much in agreement now that this was a bad war and we need to get out.
And hopefully they'll change their mind as the surge continues to work.
Well, hopefully they'll look at John McCain and see that what he brings is not anything different from Bush, but more of the same. 100 years war. I know you've had some disagreements with the interpretation of what that meant, but 100 years and Iraq in the same sentence do not make people happy.
I will agree with you on that, and I'm amazed that McCain has continued on to say that. Now, the way I see his point, based on what he said, was having a standing military presence there. I would be somewhat surprised if we didn't, but it is one of those things where, and this is one of his fundamental weaknesses, not the flip-flopping, but he entrenches himself in these statements and positions where he insists that he must continue to say it, priding himself on his straight talk. There is some straight talk I would suggest in politics you should not engage in.
Well, how do you feel in his position on campaign finance reform? Do you think he should opt into the public financing system?
I think he needs to. I think he ought to. You're looking at 2 months and $80 million. Heck, go for it. I'm surprised that Barack Obama hadn't done the math on that. I mean, he was going to go into it, and now all of a sudden he doesn't want to do it after making his position clear that he would. Frankly, I oppose public financing and the whole campaign regulatory scheme with the FEC, but I mean, go for it. You've only got 2 months. You can't spend that much money. Well, maybe you can.
Well, Barack Obama didn't say he would accept public financing. What he said was that he would enter into a conversation with the Republican to come to some kind of agreement. But John McCain opted into the public financing system when he was in the primary and had then just decided to thumb his nose at it and say he wouldn't abide by the law, despite the fact that the FEC chairman, David Mason, says that he's still bound by it. So
no, you see, I would disagree with your characterization of that, because while Mason did say that, he didn't have the authority to do anything otherwise, and the FEC has a long presidential, if I can speak this morning, precedential history of once people, if they haven't spent the money yet, can then back out of it, and that's all McCain was doing.
No, what the actual law says is that you can opt out of it if you haven't spent the money or if you haven't used it to collateralize a loan, which McCain did. And that's why the FEC chairman said you can't opt out of this until you answer questions. Just because there's no regulatory board in place in order to be able to enforce the laws, because the Bush administration hasn't backed off of Hans von Spakovsky's nomination, doesn't mean that John McCain isn't in violation of campaign finance law.
See, I just think with the history in the FEC of letting people out of it, I don't think McCain has a problem. I think he was justified in what he did.
Howard Dean got let out because he hadn't collateralized his loan. McCain very much did. The laws are quite specific, and McCain hasn't agreed to go in and answer questions with the FEC. So if he thinks he's in the right, why hasn't he done it?
Well, it is the system he created. He should go in and ask the questions, but I don't think he has any legal problems on this issue.
Well, I agree. He does need to go in and answer questions about it.
Well, this has been fun.
It's been fun, Eric.
Topics. I'm glad I got to talk to you.
You too. Thank you so much today.
You're welcome. Enjoy the rest of your day.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.